Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Friday. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Alokai. Today with me it's Filip Rakowski,
Hey everyone, I'm Filip. I'm a CTO and co-founder of Alokai.
and we will be discussing many different topics today. It's gonna be all the way from Composable, a little bit about the beginnings of Alokai, and debunking some of the myths that we are seeing on the market. So I hope you will enjoy it. And if you will have any questions after watching this, feel free to just comment them and we're gonna make sure to answer.
Why composable stack? Have you considered other directions before founding Alokai?
Well, when we were starting Alokai, it was basically a solution to problems that we had with Monolithic Magento. So obviously Monolith was not something that we were considering. We definitely exhausted all the possible options that we had within the Monolith. But in the end, it all resulted in Magento being slow, being hard to iterate on, a tech debt growing significantly, and we wanted something that was fast, that was easy to maintain, that was easy to build. So this is why we started looking for some alternatives to this typical monolithic approach. And at that time, headless wasn't such a big thing. I think Magento just released their APIs at that time, but we tried it out, and frankly, we loved it. Like, it's almost magically solved all of the problems that we had. Obviously, it also created some new ones.
Yeah, and to be honest, what we were doing at the beginning, we didn't even know how it's called, right? All of our messaging, everything we've been talking about was progressive web application, which is PWA. Besides that, headless, composable, all this stuff was not something we would be focusing on. It was really us trying to solve the problems that our customers were experiencing with traditional Magento frontend. So that was the main origin and how we went about this. But as we went further, we did a spin-off from the agency and we got our first funding round. Very shortly after, Mac Alliance was created, we started to unify the messaging from all the different vendors, right? So we've been working with headless CMSs, backend platform, search providers, and we wanted to promote this thing called Composable. And I think by now, Mac Alliance in general did a fantastic job to really explain what it is. But there are also different ways to go composable that is not necessarily going to follow all Mac principles, right? And that's something we can discuss later on.
What is MACH Alliance? What does MACH stand for?
Sure. Some people say it's basically a cult of modern e-commerce architectures, but in reality, it's just a normal association of vendors and solution integrators. So maybe let's start with actually what MACH stands for. So it is an acronym of microservices, API first, cloud native, and headless. And as I said, this is just an alliance of vendors and solution integrators that either build or integrate solutions that are following those principles. So as you could imagine, when you have a completely new approach on the market and your target audience are enterprise businesses, because Mach principles, they work best on large scale projects. When we need to simplify something that is super complex, this is usually happening within the enterprise business context. So when you have such situation and you're going with something completely new to the market, it is very, very hard to push it. You have internal politics in the companies that are just preventing people from being early adopters. You also have a lot of people who are just used to the old way of doing things and they're a little bit scared that either it will become a failure or they just don't want to risk, or they just feel confident in a different way of doing things and they're a little bit afraid about their jobs. So it's a very complex problem, and it's very hard to do this just as an individual vendor that is going there saying like, hey, we have a completely new thing. There are maybe a few case studies out there showing that it is working, but in general, it's something completely revolutionary. Like, come on, throw everything that you have right now and just use that. Like, it is working only in the situations when you have companies that have so many problems with the current setup that they will literally take anything just to try if that could solve their problem. But for a serious enterprise companies, it's just a risk. So in the Mach Alliance, there was a lot of vendors who had that problem. So they decided, like, let's do it together. Like, together we actually have much more influence. Together we can build standards. We can have a better story. We can integrate with each other. And this is what they did. And that was the origin of Mach Alliance. Like, this is how this organization was founded. Today, when Composable and Mach principles, they're no longer just a shiny new thing. It is actually something that is making a real difference. It is something that big companies are adopting. The formula of Mach Alliance has changed a little bit. They're still focusing on market education and this sort of stuff, but we are working more towards professionalizing, this space. So standards, we're working a lot on making sure that we're developing standardization that is helping to adapt Mach, but at the same time helping vendors to integrate with themselves, to just accelerate the adoption of Mach technologies, to reduce the risk, to also give a little bit of ammunition to the tech stakeholders inside the companies that will give confidence to other stakeholders.
Yeah, and I think at the very beginning, Mach Alliance had focus on the engineering part of the org, right? Talking about, again, microservices, API first, cloud native, headless. This is not something that most of business people will just understand right away. And I think right now we are also seeing the shift. So we see that most of tech-oriented people, they understand the benefits of going composable. But for business, there's still a lot of question marks, right? They are asking about return on investment, total cost of ownership, time to market. Is it really worth to go away from my current legacy platform and go the composable route? Should I make a full migration? Should I do it step by step? So there's still a lot of questions there, and I think Mag Alliance is also like opening up for having a marriage between the legacy world and composable world, where we can do it in a progressive way. And this narration that you have to change everything and re-platform and throw away everything you've built in the last year, sometimes a decade for some of the customers. This is really changing, and I think the main purpose of Mach Alliance is to align the messaging from all the vendors and push it to the market with a much bigger force.
Yeah, I agree. Especially during the early days, like, I think we're so focused on the technology and on the advocating that this new approach is so much better. It is basically the only viable approach, that there was also a lot of myths around that.
Yeah.
And people, frankly, sometimes perceive it completely differently, that it should be in a very non-pragmatic way. And also this resulted in many failed projects. So right now, I would say we are at the pragmatic phase of Mach adoption, of Mach Alliance, which is quite good, but at the same time, we have to fight with those misconceptions. And one of those is exactly what you mentioned, that complete replatforming from the technologies that you have, from the monolithic stack that you have, is the only way to benefit from those benefits of composable architecture and Mach.
Yeah.
And frankly, I would say it's the most risky one. Like, imagine you have something, you've been building this for 10 years maybe, you have a lot of custom features, like all the company knows how those things work, etc. People are trained on this, you have internal workflows, and suddenly you're saying, let's throw everything to the trash bin, let's choose 15 new vendors that we never heard about, that no one knows how to work, let's choose a completely different architecture and do things from scratch.
Yeah.
Like, it's a recipe for disaster. So I would say a full replatforming is maybe sometimes the end goal, though not always, and we will talk about that, but it's probably the most risky approach of all of them. Like, the best approach is always to be pragmatic, to look like what is the main problem, try to solve this problem with the least effort and least risk. So this is something that we are kind of trying to promote. And frankly, when I was at Mach 3 conference, I'm seeing that this is becoming a go-to approach for almost everyone.
Yes.
That you're not replatforming, you're not replacing things, you're just modernizing them. And you keep modernizing until you're happy with that. And sometimes it means that you will do a full replatforming. Sometimes it means that you will just end in the middle and say like, okay, like I switched my front end, I changed my search provider, I changed my CMS. Right now, most of my problems are gone. And yes, I could go further and maybe replace an e-commerce platform, but the risk is huge, the cost is big, and the value
unknown.
not so big anymore, right?
Yes, exactly.
What makes the architecture MACH?
I don't think it's gonna make it Mac fully. Like if we would take the grading, you probably need to follow microservices API first, cloud native, and headless, right? Most of the solutions on the market right now are cloud native. You will need to have some APIs to be able to do it. So in general, it's partially Mac, but I wouldn't call it like a fully blown Mac if they're just gonna replace one version. But I don't think they have to be full Mac right away. So that's what we just discussed with Philip, right? It's really important to be able to take the step-by-step process.
Yeah, like it is generally known, like as at least like from the tech perspective, as a hybrid setup when you're basically mixing the best of breed Mach and composable API first vendors with the good old monolithic applications that are right now giving you an API, and you're just decreasing the scope of how much you're using those applications. But at the same time, in many cases, these are still good applications. Like the fact that something failed on a full scale doesn't mean that part of those capabilities won't still be able to serve you. So it is very important actually to identify like which things work and which doesn't work, not to think about this as like a 0 and 1 kind of thinking. Because if you have something that is fulfilling 100 capabilities, it's very unlikely that like all these 100 capabilities are not served well. Like probably you maybe have problem with 20 or 30 that are real bottlenecks that are like undermining your business, making all the business processes slow, costing you lots of money, etc. Like think about identifying those and replacing them, and don't replace something that works. Like it's pointless.
Yeah.
And I think there's one more misconception about Composable that is actually not that much of a misconception, but I've been hearing a lot of different opinions about that. So Composable on its own, like it is being presented for a very long time, especially during its early days, as something simple, better, simpler, like every new shiny thing. The truth is, it is better for some use cases, especially large scale use cases, but I would never consider it being a simple solution. Like it takes time, it takes money, and it takes significant effort and knowledge to actually implement Composable and do this well. And for that, you actually need domain experts. You need a very strong team. And of course, like you could hire some in-house people, and that's one of the options. What we are seeing is usually our customers, they are turning into SIs. So an agencies that are specifically trained and experienced in implementing Composable in those transformations. And what we are seeing is that because they are dealing with such a variety of implementations, they can really advise you very well, like what actually kind of vendors you should choose, what kind of strategies you should choose for the transition, how to apply, different tactics and techniques to your particular use case. And in addition, many of them will also help you to marry the business with the technology and will help you to do a proper change management in your organization that will be aligned with the technological choices, because you cannot suddenly replace half of your technology without making significant changes in the organizations. Like those systems, they will be right now used by different people. There will be different decision makers for certain changes, for certain things. Like you need to align those things to truly benefit from Composable transformation. And it is very hard to do something like this without someone who is an expert in that and seen that at least a few times.
Yeah, and I think in general, we talked a little bit about the failed projects especially at the beginning, I think the main reason was that decisions were driven only by tech teams. They went ahead and started implementing. And when business realized how much the process itself changed,
Hmm.
they said like, no, it's not gonna work. We're not gonna throw away everything we've built. This doesn't make sense for us. So there was no alignment. And I do think it's important to have the right SI that is also gonna help you like plan the development in such a way that you will not block yourself, because like you really have to know what to do first and how to approach it, and getting your business on board and make sure they understand the different implications of changing a CMS, changing a search, how it's going to impact search optimization and so on. It's very important to really put a lot of focus on this.
Yeah, I agree. And that was also a scene, for example, of the headless movement at the Magento space.
Yes.
If you remember, like headless was also promoted as something better, as something that will magically solve your problems. And in reality, what we had is we had even backend developers implementing headless.
Yeah.
And obviously, it was a disaster. Like we had a lot of failed projects. We had a lot of situations where companies were actually getting back to the monoliths because they were realizing they don't need this headless thing. They thought all of their problems will be solved. In reality, they had exactly the same problems, but with a different technological stack.
Yeah.
So if you truly want to benefit from Composable, don't take the architecture on its own as a solution to the problem, because this is just, the way how you organize your software. It's not solve any problems on its own. Like you really need someone who will help you to take advantage of this.
What are the biggest differences between monolithic and composable architectures for e-commerce merchants?
So, from a very simple perspective, monolith means that your backend, frontend, and everything else is connected together and it's in one code base. Composable simply means that you are able to build your architecture with many different components that are separate from each other, and you can develop them in an independent way, right? So that would be like my definition that I believe business people should be able to understand in a very simple words. And I guess Philip can give more of a technical details on that.
Well, like I also like to think about it this way, or also like from the value perspective, like when you were going into the internet, as they used to say. So when you wanted to start an e-commerce business, like the only important decision that you were making at like 5-6 years ago was my e-commerce platform, because the e-commerce platform was the main value driver. It was literally doing anything like front end, as you said, customer experience. It's an e-commerce platform.
Yes.
When you wanted to integrate a third party, you were integrating it into e-commerce platform, like business logic, database, everything was an e-commerce platform. Right now, this big box is basically split into smaller boxes. So the whole stack, the value of this e-commerce platform is split into smaller boxes. And your goal is really to choose which boxes you need for your particular stack, which is great because first of all, because we have such a variety of search vendors, CMS vendors, e-commerce vendors, like all of the tiny boxes with its value, it has so many options that you can really tailor everything specifically to your needs, not only for the customer experience, but also for the back office.
Yeah.
So your internal processes. And that's one of the biggest benefits of Composable. But I would say there is another one that maybe is even more important. Like the trends, they come and go. So, we had monoliths, we had headless, we have Composable right now. We also had, hyper personalization. Right now we have AI. Who knows what we will have in a year from now? So one of the biggest advantages of composable architecture, it is actually built for change. So the value that it is unlocking is ability to actually experiment with new technologies, replace them in a relatively simple way without making a huge reinvestments. Like it is built for the architectures that are not set in stone but are evolving, and you can do this if you implement this right. You can do this relatively cheap.
Debunking common myths about composable commerce.
First of all, like just from the perspective of the business size and like who is it best for, I would say Composable is definitely something that shines the most at the large scale because of the way how it works. So in the monolithic era and with monolithic applications, you basically have a single box, an e-commerce platform that has everything baked in, like integrations, front end, back end, data, everything is in there. You're just taking it, hosting it somewhere, and it works. With Composable, first of all, like you have to make a lot of decisions because you no longer have a single vendor that is responsible for everything, but you have multiple vendors, and each of them is responsible for a small piece of what the e-commerce platform itself was responsible for. And you have a lot of flavors. So for in that case, you are able to really choose something that is specifically tailored to your business. You know, you have like 20 different CMSs. On the high level, they all look very similar, but in reality, they have differences in how they approach, for example, multi-geo setups or this sort of things. Like this way, you can really choose all of those flavors specifically to your needs, both from the customer experience side, but also from the internal processes side. So that's a huge upside, but it also has downsides because everything is so custom, everything is so tailored to the specific needs of the businesses. Also, there are not many accelerators, there are not many plug and play type of solutions. Like you really have to combine all of those things together on your own, and then you also have to, you know, build everything that is kind of like a conjunction of those things customly.
Yeah,
Patrick?
and simply say, I mean, if you are doing anything under 25, maybe even $50 million in online sales, I honestly don't think you should go composable. Like you can easily continue using your Magento, Shopify, BigCommerce setup where you have everything delivered by one vendor, and really focus on what's gonna drive your value. And once you see that, first of all, you have enough revenue and budget set aside to take a journey on the more complex way of developing stuff, which is composable, but you want the freedom, you want the ability to change things, and you also are able to reduce the vendor lock-in because you will be able to use more vendors instead of all in at one. Then composable is gonna be the way for you. But I would say the budget and the complexity is going in pair with composable. Monolith is much more simple when it comes to that, but you are not having much flexibility and you have a complete vendor lock-in. So that's definitely how I would think of a company revenue versus like which architecture they should be considering, because even us, we are getting quite a lot of requests from companies doing less than $10 million, and we tell them right away, like, just don't go that way. Like you don't have the budget, and I'm sure you also don't have the problems that composable is just gonna solve for you. You're gonna have much more problems once you go that way.
Yeah, I love this. I love this money argument because even a simple math could give you a great answer. So let's
Yes.
imagine that, you know, like implementing Composable comes with a significant cost, and it doesn't matter if you are a large enterprise company or like a mid-market company. This cost is more or less the same. So let's say it is costing you $1 million.
Yeah.
Now, if you are making 500 millions every year from your store, then 1% conversion rate uplift
Yeah.
would actually make a huge difference, and you will have a very quick ROI from this. But if you're making like 1 million in total, then it will be very hard to justify this cost of going composable. So really composable shines the most at scale. Like sometimes, you know, for a very big companies, it is worth investing millions just for a tiny improvement of a conversion rate. So it all boils down, you know, to Excel calculations.
Yes, exactly.
Complete replatforming is the only way to benefit from composable architecture.
Absolutely not.
And definitely not is the most risky one.
Yes, it's the most risky one, and it's also the one that will be the most difficult when it comes to return on investment calculations.
You have to abandon all legacy systems for the composable stack to work.
Well, each project is different, and in most cases, you don't have to do this. The new stack works through APIs. So as soon as you will decouple your backend from the frontend, it is already connected to the APIs. then basically you can benefit from all the other APIs and composable vendors that will just plug into your frontend.
Yeah, and I mean, I totally agree with that, and this is something that is also related to the replatforming that we just talked about. Uh, you can do step by step process, right? And abandoning all of your legacy just because you want to go composable simply doesn't make sense financially. Again, like it's money talks, and you need to present the business case to your board and get approvals, and it's just gonna be very difficult because yeah, in general it doesn't make sense.
Going composable requires advanced on-site engineering team.
Definitely it does. Like composable is hard. It is great. It can give you an amazing value, but it is definitely not something simple. You need domain experts. You need people who did that many times already to advise you properly and to implement this properly.
Yeah, and when we talk about having an in-house team, you definitely need to have someone that can lead the project, right? Like a true owner. But it doesn't mean that you need to hire all the development team and all the engineering team in-house. You can also pick from one of the solution integrators that did that many times on different scale for different customers, so they have the experience that is going to help you avoid a lot of mistakes, and those mistakes can be very expensive where doing composable implementations. So in general you need very skilled team, but it doesn't mean all of them have to be in-house. You can work with SIs, and that's what we always recommend.
You have to custom build your composable front end.
Well, that's not the only way to do this. Like in reality, you have a variety of options to choose from. You have vendor accelerators, they are usually limited to a certain set of integrations. You also have solutions like Alokai that are fully decoupled from the underlying technologies that allow you to do a little bit more. Also, the vendors integrate with each other and build their own accelerators, the SI build accelerators. So in reality, there are many options to have an acceleration. But yes, a lot of work has to be done in a custom way.
Yeah, so I would agree. When we go back to the scale of the customers, if you are making 100, 200, 500 million dollars or more online, uh, you don't want your website to look exactly as your competitor. So you need to customize it, and that's what we mean by custom build on the user experience. But you can get a lot of the things out of the box coming from different vendors, and that's what you should leverage. So think of it as a combination of build and buy.
What is front end as a service? How is it different from outsourcing front end development?
So frontend as a service, in short words, it's basically a new way of building frontend that is focused on either management of the frontend itself, either building of it, either connecting of different third-party tools into it. So it's basically the same difference as with when we're building software on our own and then we're having a SaaS software that is simplifying a lot of workflows, simplifying a lot of things. So it's the same thing with frontend as a service. Frontend as a service is simplifying for us infrastructure, editing content, managing integrations, and this sort of stuff.
Yes, and of course we are continuously defining the definition itself. But if we think of alternatives, it's accelerators built by SIs, uh, building a custom from scratch, and that requires also building all the other integrations from scratch. And then you have solutions that are coming straight from vendors. So SAP used to have Spartacus, now it's called Composable Storefront. Salesforce has PWA Kit, Magento has PWA Studio, and so on and so on. So I would say that those are the three options that you have out there when you are looking for alternatives.
Is front end as a service a right approach for everyone?
Well, composable in general show best ROI when it is applied at a large scale. So I would say it is definitely most compelling for the large scale, though frontend as a service itself, because of its simplification of many things and abstractions and acceleration, it is actually decreasing the cost of adopting composable architecture.
Yeah, so we are really trying to make things easier. And again, it's a combination of build and buy. So we are making sure that with the right frontend as a service, customers don't have to reinvent the wheel, and they have enough building blocks and all the tools they need to customize further based on what they're gonna get out of the box.
What are the main financial benefits of front-end as a service for e-commerce?
Well, I think the biggest one is like with any kind of SaaS software versus build software, like you're not spending time and money on reinventing the wheel on things that really don't provide any unique value to your business. Uh, Another benefit is that you really don't have to dedicate your precious time and precious resources on keeping all the integrations up to date and making sure that all the third-party software that you're using is up to date and maintaining this. Definitely not having to worry about infrastructure and scalability of it is another huge benefit, because this is also the part that is usually the hardest to get right. Uh, Apart from this, as we were saying before, I think ability to fine tune the experience of your users and your internal workflows to really be specifically tailored to your needs. It is also a huge advantage of frontend as a service that is coming at a very reduced cost compared to building something completely customly.
Yeah, and maybe something to add when we think of some of the use cases where you have a very large group and you have many brands within the group, and those brands are also operating on different markets. So you have multi-brand and you have multi-geo. This is where frontend as a service can heavily decrease the cost of releasing additional brands. So once you release your MVP and you have brand number one available in the US, to launch it in Europe, it's super fast. Then you take the whole design system and all the components you've built, and you can do it for brand number two and three. And the more components you have, the further the brand, the easier it will be to deploy and do the go to market, go live with this.
Yeah, and that would be even an advantage of like front-end as a service platforms, where you also have everything coupled with each other, because then you can optimize this even further, not only take what you've developed before and copy this, but actually figure out how to have the most possible optimized setup when you, for example, have a single code base that has some configuration layer that is allowing you to deploy to all of those geographies, to all of those brands, without really copying the stuff and having to maintain this. So it is really saving costs and giving something that a lot of enterprise companies these days care about a lot. It is giving you agility.
Yes.
What should you consider before going composable to achieve better results?
Well, I would say, like, first and foremost, you have to identify what are your key problems, right? So when you come to the conclusion that you have outgrown your current stack, it is usually not something that is just caused by a single issue. Like when you have a single problem, you can offload it in many ways. You can just do a dirty fix or even not a dirty fix. But at some point, those things accumulate. And at some point, it's impossible to just fix this. Like you have to think about either starting from scratch or replacing something completely. So based on our experience, companies move to the composable architecture when they want to improve the customer experience, when they want to improve the ability to adapt to this ever-changing commerce landscape, especially for the retail companies. This is super important that they have this agility, ability to adapt to the new technologies like AI, personalization, online, social shopping, this sort of things. Some of them, B2B companies, for example, they very often want to improve the business processes, but the technology is actually a roadblock for that. Like it is simply impossible to do some things because of how the technology works. So Composable is giving you this ability to really, fine tune every detail of your back office, to fine tune every detail of your customer experience to your needs. So when we see that someone has those problems, this is a very strong signal that they actually need composable architecture. And obviously, it's not something that is a determining factor. Like if you see this, it is probably a good sign that you should start evaluating this. Then you should start looking at your problems, identify which of those problems can be solved with composable architecture. Ideally, decide if you want to either pick a lowest hanging fruit, so something that could very easily demonstrate the value, or maybe you have a huge problem, which is, let's call it like most painful problem, that you really desperately want to solve, and that will definitely bring a lot of value, and focus on that one. So that's what I would do, and start with like a small POC, not going very hardcore into like a very big implementation, a very big bet. Because first of all, like you need to see how it works. You need to demonstrate the value, and ideally the ROI should be as fast as possible.
Yeah, and what I always tell the customers is they should really write down all the KPIs that they are looking to improve. Try to verify some of those KPIs very quickly through proof of concept and then an MVP, and then compare the results. And it's totally fine to make assumptions on some of the KPIs because you might not even have the data as of today, right? So you want to make an assumption on where you would like to be after implementing Composable, because very often I see companies just going in, not setting the KPIs they will track, and then delivering the project and then scratching their heads. So was it successful or not? Because they didn't really know what to track. And as you are trying to define KPIs, you are kind of forced to figure out your problems, as you mentioned, right? Otherwise, it's gonna be a big problem.
Yeah, a good example could be, for example, when you have multiple geographies, and within those multiple geographies, you're using multiple vendors, and it is taking you a significant amount of time to update all of those applications, and it is costing you a significant amount of money to do this. Like a good KPI, for example, for like a long-term horizon could be, okay, so we want to go from this time of applying a change to this time. We want to go from this cost to that cost. And this is something that composable architecture could actually enable. Like, it is wonderful in simplifying a very complex setups. It is complex on its own, but frankly, it is usually nothing compared to like a very sophisticated and really messed, because that's how many organizations work. Like, they work by geography setups, where each region is actually making their own decisions about the vendors, about the technological stack, etc. So in such cases, Composable can be a wonderful solution to those problems.
What benefits merchants running on SAP backend unlock by decoupling their front end with the help of Alokai?
Well, first of all, like if you are using Alokai with SAP, there's a number of things that you could improve with our stack, and obviously, like depending on how far you will go with composable architecture, this can be a little bit different. But even if you just use Alokai without any other accompanying composable vendors, like you can definitely improve your customer's experience. Like, you will decouple frontend from the backend. You will have full control over how it looks, how fast it is. You will be able to scale it separately, optimize it separately. Even if you have a very clunky backend, when you have built up a lot of technical debt that is slowing it down, it won't have a direct impact on the speed of your storefront and also speed of the development of the storefront. So I think that's one of the biggest benefits, because frankly, like the customer, they wouldn't notice if you would replace an e-commerce platform. Like, all they care about is the customer experience, and that's something that can be greatly improved. Another thing is speed of the application itself and the development that will be happening for this application. So first of all, like, we are no longer coupled with any kind of backend elements of our stack, which means that the frontend itself can be even a purely static website that they're just taking the data from an API that is being served through the CDN. This can be insanely fast. Like, this is something that is almost unachievable with like a large monolithic platforms. And the second thing is, we will have a completely separate team of front-end developers working only on this front end. Their context will be much smaller because they really don't need to even know what is underneath. Like, everything that they care about is this small front-end code base, and they can iterate very fast and do this, much cheaper. Anything else you would add, Patrick?
Yeah, so I think what's important that going with us is also giving them option to pick between different CMSs and search vendors, right? So the out of the box integrations that we provide. I think what's also very good is that many customers that are using SAP today, they very often have a B2C business and B2B, right? So it's like B2B2C. And with Alokai, we deliver both B2C and B2B features. And in B2B, they are delivered as modules, so they can pick what features, what modules they actually need. So it's giving them this ability to just use one product for all the use cases that they have. And for the large groups, our support of multi-region, multi-brand, multi-store, all the features that are required by large groups, they are also there, which means like they don't have to develop this from scratch. So we are able to heavily reduce the cost and risk of going composable on top of SAP without replatforming from SAP. I think that's like one of the most important takeaways. We are advocates of modernizing SAP instead of replatforming.
What upcoming Alokai product updates should we be most excited about?
Oh, definitely. I think, Patrick, we can talk about commerce intelligence. It is something that was in our heads for a very long time, and right now it is becoming a reality. So the problem that we see is when you have tech teams that are implementing composable commerce and building custom storefronts, there are so many things that are impacting the revenue. And in reality, when we're asking our customers and also others how they're making decisions about the things they should prioritize that have biggest impact on the revenue, frankly, they're doing this on a gut feeling. Like they don't have enough data that is backing up their decisions. So this is something that we're trying to solve with commerce intelligence. Like we're trying to give tech teams and insightful information about how the technology that they are building is impacting their revenue. What are the opportunities to improve? What are some kind of like a serious incidents that are happening, like for example memory leaks or some JavaScript errors that are reducing their conversion, and just helping them to fix them as soon as possible.
Yeah, and the most common answer we had from technology leaders was that what they fix is based on when the ticket was submitted, right? And they also measure time to close the ticket. So they just go one by one. So engineer comes to work, opens Jira, and takes the first task on the top because the that was like required in the longest period of time, right? So they don't really think of the impact. They don't really think of what's the actual value. It's just, oh my god, it was there for 3 days and now is the time I take care of it,
Yeah.
because otherwise my manager is gonna give me some issues. We really want to shift the amount of time developers spend searching for what's broken, because right now it's around 70%, and then they go into fix, which is 30%. We want them to spend 70% of their time fixing stuff and just 30% or even less trying to find out what's wrong, because we can automate this process for them, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think what is beautiful with commerce intelligence is I think it is amplifying really the value of Composable. Because if you think about this, like one of the biggest advantages of Composable is this ability to fine tune every detail to maximize revenue. The
Yes.
problem that we have is that we not always know about those every details. So commerce intelligence is actually filling this gap and giving all of the users that will be using this a very insightful information about every area that they have missed that can actually improve their revenue and also make more informed decisions. Like if you'll be looking at the 10 incidents that you will have at commerce intelligence with more or less estimated value that they are getting, then you can do estimations on your end and see like, okay, like this is an issue, but solving this will cost us $30,000. In reality, we're losing maybe $500 on this. That's probably not even something worth looking at. At the same time, you could have something that you estimated to solve for a few $1,000s and it is generating you a 500K loss. It's a no-brainer, right? So they will be able to make much more informed decisions and just focus on things that bring the most value.
Yeah, and the most important piece for CTOs, VP engineering, is that they will be able to show the value of the engineering team that is working on that implementation, on that project. And I want CTO to be able to go into the quarterly board meeting and say something like, we went live with Alokai 3 months ago, so now we are first quarter in. Alokai helped us to recover potentially lost 500,000 of revenue. We fixed all those issues 70% faster than we used to. And just to remind you, we are paying them only 250K a year, right? So they made return on investment in the first 3 months of being live with Alokai. That's something that I want to see happen, and I'm sure that's the pitch the CTOs will be able to do during board meetings, and it will make them an absolute heroes because they are already there, but they just miss good enough data to support this.
Yeah, that's probably gonna be also a pitch of the developers to their managers when they'll be asking for a rise.
Yes, exactly.
And there's one more thing I would love to mention, because it is something that we discovered very recently, and we've been talking about this a few times today. Is the multi-brand accelerator that we are working on right now.
Yes.
So the more we are in the SAP space, the more we see that companies are coming to us. Like, sometimes their biggest problem is really the fact that their stack is extremely complicated. It is very hard for them to iterate. They're spending a lot of money on that because of how enterprises work.
Mhm.
Usually they're making region-based decisions if they are not, so important that you need to make a decision on top, which results that almost every geo or every brand, they're building their own e-commerce, they're choosing their own stack. And at some point when e-commerce became big enough, they are seeing that, hey, like, we're wasting a lot of money on that. Like, when we want to ship an update, sometimes it is taking us a lot of time to align all the geos to do this. Like, we are not able to iterate fast enough. It is eating a lot of money, a lot of resources. It is just not efficient enough. And they're coming to us because they see that we can actually fix this problem for them. And I think this is something where we as Alokai have a very unique value on the market, because we are a platform.
Yes.
So solving a problem of multi-brand, it requires you coordination on every layer: infrastructure, orchestration, the front end itself, the design system.
Yeah.
Like, with the solution that we have, we're actually able to have a single repository for all the combinations of brands and geos where the customers can deploy from. Like, it is a tremendous, tremendous value, and something that I'm super excited about. So we gathered all those use cases that we had, like the problems of the customers that we had and how we solved it from them. And right now we're building an accelerator that has basically all of those things out of the box.
Yeah, it's gonna be a game changer for them because I remember some of the larger projects we had in the past, and that was exactly the problem. And the amount of money they can save simply by reducing the amount of development they have to do with each update is just ridiculous, right? So it's gonna be really, really big value for them.
What trends do you foresee in the e-commerce industry? How is Alokai going to address them?
Well, at least what I am seeing when I am talking with SIs, I am talking with vendors from the Mac space, but not only, is that pragmatism will definitely become, or it is already becoming, more important than purism and shiny new technology, especially in the Mac era, like when it was growing and when we had COVID and insane investments for the e-commerce space. Like, the only option was to go 100% Mac, 100 Composable, throw everything that you have, it's a trash. Right now, companies see that it is more of a risk than a go-to approach. They're trying to be very pragmatic about how they spend money, what is the ROI, how they can bring the biggest value, how they can reduce the risk, and the perfect architectures, the perfect setups, I don't think they will be actually implemented. Like, I'm not seeing that happening. Like, the reality is that this best of need is actually replacing the best of breed. Like, companies are changing what they need. The companies are changing what brings the biggest value, and just keeping the things that work well. And the composable architecture itself, I think it is definitely here to stay, because it is giving a lot of flexibility and it is really like built for change, which I think is wonderful. But we haven't seen that many standardization happening in this space for a long time. Like, everyone were experimenting, trying to figure out what are the best ways. I think we are at the stage where those things emerged more or less naturally. And right now, the Mac Alliance Tech Council, for example, is trying to put those standards on paper and just try to, enforce, maybe it's not the best word, but like encourage the whole industry to follow them. So I'm super excited about that because I think it will simplify implementing Composable. It will make integrations between vendors easier. And, as a result, it will be just cheaper and more reliable for everyone. Obviously, AI, like we all talk about generative AI. I think we're still in a hype phase, though. Right now, it's a little bit slowed down, but I'm quite sure it will have a transformative impact on e-commerce, like especially things like content generation, like chatbot assistants, maybe personalized search experiences, even with personalized product information based on the data that you're gathering. It is definitely something that will really change the e-commerce industry and will do this very fast. Personalization was already a thing for quite a long time, but I think AI will absolutely elevate it to the next level. And like what we also see in the market purely from the business perspective is that we had monoliths. There were those big giants.
Yeah.
Then we had a few smaller companies, contenders that were pushing a new approach, Composable. They managed to change the perception of the market. So right now, those vendors, they are kind of, condensing, like we're seeing a lot of acquisitions on the market. So we will again have platforms, I think, but those will be composable platforms. So like a vendors that instead of having just one monolithic application that was bringing the whole value, we will be giving exactly the same value, but for 20, composable applications. So it's probably a cycle, I would say. And we're at the stage of the cycle when we're getting back to the platforms and a big condensation of value within a single vendor.
Yeah. So what I think it's quite important that in general, going composable is gonna become much cheaper and easier, and that's because of the things you mentioned: AI, easier integration, customizations, automations, and so on. But I also think that because of acquisitions, but also because of those vendors that are doing one thing very, very well, it will force like all the large platforms, like large vendors, to change the pricing and make it modular, right? So if you want to use Salesforce as a backend, but you don't want to use anything else from Salesforce, why should you pay a full Salesforce price?
Yeah.
And customers will start to rebel. They will say, we want to use Alokai, we want to use Contentful, we want to use Constructor, Algolia, Bloomreach, right? We don't want your search because it's not good enough, right?
Yeah.
If you would improve it, we are happy to pay for it. So go and buy Constructor, and then we're gonna give you the money. So I honestly think customers will basically change the demand, and they will force those large vendors to change the way how they charge for it. I also think that there will be a massive shift in the B2B space, where we're gonna see a lot of B2B players completely changing the overall customer experience in a good way. And it's gonna get much closer to what we are now experiencing on B2C, because B2B is far behind, but we can see a lot of customers are pushing for it. And as we're gonna make it easier, like it is gonna become much closer to B2C, because that's how it should be, right?
Absolutely agree, especially about customers actually having a huge impact on how the market will look like, because frankly, it was easy to fool them with shiny marketing claims at the beginning of the existence of Composable.
Yeah.
When you had this, glitch in matrix called COVID with those huge investments. But right now, they're much more educated. There is enough projects that were successful and not successful to learn from. There is enough case studies. So they will definitely be more demanding and more value driven than before.
Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. And as I mentioned before, if you have any questions, if you maybe would like us to deep dive into some of the topics we mentioned today, let us know in the comments, and we're gonna make sure to either give you an answer if that's something relatively quickly, or we're just gonna make another Headless Huddle or any other webinar where we can dive deep into certain topics. Thank you so much.